The printer beside the customer service desk sounded older than the building itself. Slow gears. Dry rollers. A tired mechanical cough every few seconds. Walter Boone stood quietly while the young bank clerk fed another sheet into the tray and told him it would cost $22 to print the statements tied to his late wife's account. Not copies. Not certified records. Just printed statements from the bank's own archive system. People in line turned to look when Walter asked her to repeat the amount. The branch manager stepped out of his office with a rehearsed smile and explained the archival retrieval processing fee loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Walter nodded once, reached into the pocket of his old denim coat, and counted exact bills onto the counter beside a folded grocery receipt. What nobody noticed was the way he studied the manager's signature stamp. Or the way his daughter stopped speaking entirely when she saw the date printed at the bottom of one statement. November 3, 1976. The same date stamped across a county audit file nobody had opened in nearly 50 years. Walter Boone visited the branch every Thursday morning just after sunrise. Same routine for almost 12 years. Coffee at the diner across Route 14. 2 sugars. Toast wrapped in a napkin for later. Then a slow drive into town in a faded green Ford pickup his wife used to call stubborn enough to survive a tornado. Nobody at Ridgemont County Trust paid much attention to him anymore. That was part of the problem. The branch had changed over the years. Older tellers retired. Carpet replaced. Loan desks converted into glass cubicles with computer monitors mounted like courtroom screens. The younger employees spoke in scripts. Smiled in scripts too. Walter noticed that immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Boone. Anything else I can help you with today?" "Policy requires authorization." Always policy. That Thursday, Walter asked for copies of old account statements connected to a small agricultural operating account he and his wife once used during the late 70s. Nothing unusual. The account had technically closed decades earlier after their soybean acreage was reduced during the drought years. The teller disappeared into the back office. 10 minutes later, she returned carrying a printed pricing sheet. Archival retrieval begins at $22. Walter blinked once. For paper. It accesses legacy storage systems. Her voice carried the careful confidence of somebody repeating language written by legal departments. People behind him shifted impatiently. Walter asked whether digital copies cost less. "No, sir." The branch manager heard the exchange and stepped in immediately. Curtis Hale. 42. Perfect haircut. Expensive watch. The kind of man who leaned forward during conversations only when customers became difficult. "These requests require internal labor," Hale explained. "Most clients understand that." Walter noticed the wording. Most clients. Not customers. Clients. He removed his wallet slowly while several people in line watched him count the money by hand. A younger man behind him smirked at the delay. Walter heard it but ignored it. Humiliation settled quietly in the room the way dust settles inside old churches. Nobody acknowledged it directly. The printer began spitting out pages. Hale signed the release authorization with a blue stamp instead of a pen. Walter noticed that too. By the time he returned home, his daughter Clara was already sitting at the kitchen table reviewing utility bills. She handled most paperwork since Evelyn died 3 winters earlier. Clara had once worked in county administration before moving back to help her father keep the farm operational. Walter handed her the statements without speaking. She flipped through them absent-mindedly at first. Then stopped. One page held a transfer adjustment tied to Agricultural Risk Consolidation Holdings. The date beneath it. November 3, 1976. Clara stared at it longer than necessary. Walter poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs before finally asking what she saw. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked to the old filing cabinet near the hallway closet and unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside sat dozens of labeled folders Evelyn had preserved for nearly 50 years. Feed invoices. Seed contracts. Survey maps. Tax appeals. Handwritten notebooks tied with faded ribbon. Clara pulled out a thin county folder marked Ridgemont Agricultural Audit, 1976. Walter felt the room change before she even opened it. Inside was a carbon copy memorandum discussing irregular land-backed collateral transfers between Ridgemont County Trust and a development partnership connected to state highway expansion. Several pages were missing. But one surviving signature matched the blue authorization stamp Curtis Hale still used at the bank. Not Curtis himself. His father. Harold Hale. Former regional director. Clara looked toward the window where evening light settled across the soybean fields. That fee wasn't random, she said quietly. Walter remained still. On the final page of the audit folder, nearly hidden beneath faded typewriter ink, appeared a handwritten note from a county investigator dated December 1976. Request suspended pending external review of displaced farm accounts. No external review file number appeared anywhere in county records. And someone had removed the investigator's final report entirely. The next morning arrived with freezing rain tapping softly against the kitchen windows. Walter woke before daylight, lit the stove kettle, and spread the old documents across the dining table beneath a yellow overhead bulb that hummed faintly every few seconds. Clara barely slept. She spent most of the night comparing names from the 1976 audit folder against property maps stored in county tax archives online. By sunrise, legal pads covered the table in careful handwriting. Dates circled in red ink. Parcel numbers. Transfer sequences. Loan references. Walter sat quietly with coffee cooling in his hands while Clara worked through another stack. Neither of them spoke much. That silence had always been part of how the family survived hard years. Around 7:30, Clara finally pushed one document toward him. Look at these acre totals. Walter adjusted his glasses. In 1975, 7 neighboring farms collectively controlled roughly 2,300 acres bordering what later became the North Valley Commercial Corridor. By 1982, every property had either defaulted, subdivided, or transferred into development holding groups tied to Ridgemont County Trust. Not sold willingly. Transferred. The wording mattered. Walter recognized 3 family names immediately. The Turners. The Bellows. The Carsons. People he grew up beside. People who lost farms during the grain collapse years. For decades everyone assumed those foreclosures were unfortunate but legitimate. High interest rates. Drought pressure. Commodity crashes. Normal explanations. But Clara noticed something unusual buried inside the transaction records. The foreclosure dates happened before the official loan delinquency notices were filed. Walter read the sequence twice. Then a third time. That's not possible, he murmured. Clara nodded slowly. Unless the defaults were processed internally first. The kettle whistled sharply in the background. Walter turned off the burner and stared through the fogged kitchen window toward the road leading into town. He remembered meetings held inside Ridgemont County Trust during the late 70s. Farmers waiting in stiff chairs with hats folded in their hands while executives explained restructuring agreements nobody fully understood. Most signed because they trusted the bank. Or because they were desperate. By noon, Clara drove to the county records office housed inside the old courthouse annex beside Main Street. The building smelled like dust, radiator heat, and aging paper. Filing cabinets stretched wall to wall behind a reception counter worn smooth by decades of elbows. An older clerk named Miriam recognized Clara immediately. Back chasing ghosts again? Clara smiled faintly. Just trying to locate an external review file from '76. Miriam typed carefully into the county archive system. Nothing appeared. She tried alternate indexing methods. Still nothing. Finally, she removed her glasses and leaned closer to the monitor. That's strange. What? There's evidence the file existed. Clara felt her stomach tighten. Miriam rotated the screen slightly. A retrieval log from January 1984 showed access activity connected to the review file number. But the actual file itself had been reclassified and removed from public inventory the same week. Who authorized it? Clara asked. Miriam frowned. No department listed. Can records disappear without authorization? Miriam hesitated too long before answering. Not officially. Outside, rainwater rolled slowly down courthouse windows while Clara copied every retrieval entry by hand into her notebook. Before leaving, she asked one more question. Who handled agricultural reviews back then? Miriam thought for a moment. There was an investigator from the State Finance Commission. Daniel Mercer, I think. Still alive? No idea. That evening, Walter drove alone to the old Turner property 6 miles west of town. Most of the farmhouse had collapsed years earlier, but the original mailbox still leaned beside the gravel road surrounded by weeds and rusted fencing. Walter parked quietly and walked the edge of the field. He remembered Mr. Turner sitting at their kitchen table in 1978 with tears in his eyes after losing 3 generations of land. At the time, everyone blamed weather and debt. Now Walter wasn't certain. Near the roadside fence line, he noticed survey stakes protruding from the ground beneath dead grass. Fresh markers. Recently painted orange. Development markers. Someone was preparing land assessments again. A black SUV sat parked half a mile away near the commercial corridor overlook. Walter recognized the Ridgemont County Trust logo on the driver's side door. He said nothing when the vehicle slowly pulled away. Back at the farmhouse, Clara waited beside a stack of copied county maps. I found something else, she said quietly. She handed him a photocopied highway planning document dated 1977. A proposed expansion route crossed directly through every foreclosed property connected to the suspicious transfers. Walter studied the map carefully. The future commercial corridor had already been planned before most farms entered foreclosure proceedings. Which meant somebody inside the bank knew the land value would explode years later. And according to the audit notes, they acquired those properties before the public announcements were ever released. Clara unfolded one final paper from her coat pocket. A handwritten ledger reference she copied from the courthouse retrieval logs. External review materials transferred, private storage authorization HH. Walter stared at the initials. Harold Hale. The same man whose signature stamp still sat behind the manager's desk at Ridgemont County Trust. And for the first time since Evelyn died, Walter Boone felt something cold. Then grief settled into his chest. Someone had buried this intentionally. The farmhouse basement smelled like cedar wood, machine oil, and old paper. Walter had not opened Evelyn's storage shelf since the funeral. The room sat beneath the kitchen with low concrete walls and exposed pipes running across the ceiling. Metal cabinets lined one side beside stacked feed ledgers dating back to the early 80s. Most people would have seen clutter. Evelyn had called it insurance. She never threw paperwork away, Clara said softly as she pulled the chain on a hanging bulb. Walter nodded once. That habit used to irritate him. Now it felt different. Outside, cold wind moved through the soybean fields in long dry waves while the two of them sorted through boxes labeled in Evelyn's precise handwriting. Taxes. Feed orders. State claims. Water rights. Each folder carried dates written carefully in black marker. Everything organized. Everything preserved. Clara opened a rusted filing drawer near the workbench and froze. Inside sat 6 spiral notebooks wrapped together with twine. Walter recognized them immediately. Evelyn's banking notebooks. During the late 70s, Evelyn handled nearly every meeting with Ridgemont County Trust because Walter spent most planting seasons in the fields from before dawn until dark. She took notes obsessively. Loan conversations. Interest rate changes. Manager names. Promise dates. Walter used to joke that she recorded conversations like a courtroom stenographer. Now he wished he had paid closer attention. Clara untied the notebooks carefully and opened the oldest volume. Inside were page after page of dated entries written in blue ink. March 12, 1976, Hale says restructuring temporary. Claims county expansion rumors exaggerated. June 4, 1976, Turner family denied renewal despite collateral increase. August 19, 1976, Harold Hale mentioned priority acquisition corridor after assuming I wasn't listening. Walter sat down slowly at the workbench. Clara continued turning pages. The entries became increasingly detailed toward the end of 1976. Evelyn documented conversations after meetings. Recorded exact wording from bank representatives. Circled names repeatedly. Then Clara stopped at a folded sheet taped inside the back cover. It was a hand-drawn map. Parcel outlines. Highway projections. Farm ownership markings. Walter leaned closer. The map matched the same commercial corridor later developed during the mid-80s. But Evelyn's version carried annotations besides several properties. Foreclosure expected. Transfer delayed. Pressure through variable rate. Walter stared silently. She knew, Clara whispered. Not everything. But enough. Tucked behind the map sat a carbon copy letter dated February 1977 addressed to the State Agricultural Finance Commission. Evelyn had drafted a formal complaint alleging irregular foreclosure acceleration practices by Ridgemont County Trust. The letter was never mailed. Walter recognized the reason immediately. At the bottom corner, written in Evelyn's handwriting. Wait until harvest season passes. Too dangerous right now. Clara sat back heavily. For several moments, only the furnace hummed beneath the floorboards. Then Walter reached for another notebook. Near the middle pages, he found something stranger. Evelyn had copied internal reference numbers from bank folders she apparently glimpsed during meetings. Most meant nothing now except one entry repeatedly underlined across multiple pages. ARCH Consolidation Program. Walter read the initials aloud. Clara moved quickly to the county map spread across the basement table. There, she said. One of the suspicious transfer entities from the printed bank statement carried almost identical wording. Agricultural Risk Consolidation Holdings. ARCH. The same initials. Neither spoke for several seconds. The realization settled slowly but heavily. This was not random misconduct. It looked organized. Systematic. Structured years in advance. Upstairs, the telephone rang sharply through the quiet farmhouse. Walter climbed the stairs and answered. Mr. Boone. The voice belonged to Curtis Hale. Polite. Controlled. We noticed unusual archival activity connected to dormant agricultural accounts. I wanted to ensure our staff treated you appropriately. Walter looked through the kitchen window toward the dark road outside. You charged me $22 for paper. A pause followed. Then Hale gave a short rehearsed laugh. Policies change over time. Walter said nothing. Hale continued carefully. If there are concerns regarding historical records, the bank can arrange private consultations before misunderstandings spread unnecessarily. Misunderstandings. Walter recognized the shift immediately. Not dismissal anymore. Containment. We're fine, Walter replied quietly. After hanging up, he returned downstairs and told Clara everything word for word. She opened Evelyn's final notebook again. Near the last page sat a sentence written alone beneath several crossed-out lines. If they ever panic first, it means the records survived somewhere. Walter looked at the basement shelves differently after that. Not as storage. Not as memories. As preparation. Evelyn had understood something before anyone else did. She just never lived long enough to finish proving it. Later that night, Clara searched state archive databases until nearly midnight before finally locating one surviving reference connected to Daniel Mercer, the state finance investigator from 1976. Retired. Living 2 counties away. No public phone number listed. But attached to the file was one final notation entered in 1985. Witness interview suspended following institutional settlement review. Walter read the line twice. Settlement for what? He asked quietly. Clara looked toward Evelyn's notebook spread across the basement table. 2 days later, Walter and Clara drove north through freezing farmland beneath a pale gray sky that never fully brightened. Daniel Mercer lived outside Ashcombe County in a narrow white farmhouse surrounded by dormant cornfields and rusted irrigation equipment. The mailbox leaned sideways near the road, nearly hidden by weeds. No vehicles sat in the driveway except an aging Chevrolet pickup covered in road salt. Walter noticed the curtains move before they even reached the porch. Someone was watching them. Clara carried Evelyn's notebook inside a weatherproof folder against her chest while Walter knocked twice on the screen door. No answer. Then a voice from inside. "You should leave. Old. Careful. Exhausted." Walter waited quietly. "We came about Ridgemont County Trust," he said. Silence followed. Long enough for Clara to hear a chair scrape slowly across hardwood floors. Finally, the door opened several inches. Daniel Mercer looked older than either of them expected. Thin shoulders. Deep lines beneath tired eyes. One hand resting visibly against the frame like he needed support standing upright. The moment he saw Evelyn's handwriting through the partially opened folder, his expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. "You're Boone's family," Mercer said quietly. Walter nodded once. Mercer stared past them toward the empty road before stepping aside without another word. Inside, the farmhouse smelled like dust, coffee grounds, and old newspapers. Filing boxes filled nearly half the living room beneath stacks of state reports tied with string. Clara immediately noticed labels marked Agricultural Claims Review and County Foreclosure Appeals. Mercer saw her looking. "I kept copies," he admitted. Walter remained standing near the door. "Why?" Mercer lowered himself carefully into a recliner beside the window. "Because people stopped asking questions too quickly." The room fell silent except for the ticking wall clock above the kitchen entrance. For nearly an hour, Mercer spoke in restrained fragments while Clara took notes. During the mid-1970s, several regional banks, including Ridgemont County Trust, gained access to confidential state transportation projections years before public release. The information identified future highway corridors expected to multiply land values dramatically. According to Mercer, certain executives realized struggling farm owners along those routes could be pressured into early defaults before the expansion became public knowledge. Variable rate restructuring agreements became the tool. Farmers believed they were receiving temporary relief. Instead, many unknowingly signed accelerated collateral clauses allowing banks to trigger foreclosure internally before formal delinquency filings appeared in public court systems. Walter listened without interruption. Mercer eventually opened one of the filing boxes beside his chair and removed a faded legal folder. Inside sat copied correspondence between Ridgemont County Trust executives and outside development partnerships. One memo carried Harold Hale's signature. Priority acquisition schedule must remain insulated from county disclosure until transfer sequence finalized. Clara felt her pulse rise. It was the first direct evidence connecting the bank to deliberate land targeting. Mercer noticed her reaction immediately. "That document nearly ended my career." "What happened in 1985? Walter asked. Mercer looked toward the dark kitchen for several seconds before answering. There was supposed to be a formal review. Instead, state officials suddenly suspended the investigation after several private settlements were negotiated between banks and affected landowners. Most families accepted modest compensation because they were financially ruined already. And because nobody understood the full scale. The review disappeared after that, Mercer said quietly. "Who stopped it?" Mercer gave a tired smile without humor. "Men with larger offices than mine." Outside, tires crunched slowly across gravel. All three of them turned toward the window simultaneously. A black SUV rolled past the farmhouse without stopping. Same Ridgemont County Trust logo on the door. Walter recognized it instantly. Mercer noticed his expression. "They've been checking the road since yesterday." Clara's stomach tightened. "They knew we were coming." Mercer looked directly at Walter. "Banks don't panic over paper fees unless somebody touches the wrong archive. That evening, Walter and Clara returned home carrying photocopies sealed inside 2 separate folders. Walter placed one inside the truck toolbox beneath spare chains and tools. The second remained hidden beneath loose floorboards in the basement workshop. Precautions Evelyn would have approved of. At sunrise the following morning, Ridgemont County Trust called again. This time the regional office. A woman with a measured corporate voice informed Walter the bank wished to resolve any historical confusion cooperatively. She offered reimbursement for archival fees along with a private financial review package. Walter declined politely. An hour later, Curtis Hale arrived personally at the farmhouse. No tie this time. No rehearsed smile either. He stood beside the porch holding a leather folder while cold wind moved through the soybean fields behind him. "I think this situation is becoming unnecessarily adversarial," Hale said carefully. Walter leaned against the porch railing without inviting him inside. "You charged me $22. Hale exhaled slowly. "This isn't about the fee anymore." Walter noticed sweat gathering near Hale's collar despite the cold. That mattered. Hale opened the folder and slid a typed document forward. A confidentiality agreement. Along with an offer. $200,000 in exchange for relinquishing claims connected to historical agricultural account disputes. No admission of wrongdoing. No public filing. No investigation. Walter read every line slowly while Hale waited. Then he folded the document once and handed it back untouched. "My wife kept records," Walter said quietly. For the first time since this began, Curtis Hale lost control of his expression. "Just briefly. But long enough." "What kind of records?" he asked. Walter looked toward the distant fields beyond the road. "The kind people forget exist." Hale stared at him another moment before returning silently to his car. That night, Clara discovered something else hidden inside Mercer's copied files. A transfer authorization referencing a private records warehouse outside Ridgemont County. Storage Unit C-14. Contents listed only as original audit exhibits. The storage warehouse sat 40 miles east of Ridgemont beside an abandoned rail depot surrounded by chain-link fencing and cracked asphalt. Walter arrived before sunrise. Fog drifted low across the lot while freight trains groaned faintly somewhere beyond the tree line. Clara parked beside a row of rusted loading bays and checked the copied authorization sheet again beneath the truck's dome light. Storage Unit C-14. Authorization Origin, State Agricultural Finance Commission. Transfer date, April 18, 1985. The warehouse office smelled like old cardboard and radiator heat. Behind the counter sat a heavy-set manager wearing reading glasses attached to a faded neck cord. Walter handed him the reference number without explanation. The man typed slowly into an outdated terminal. Then paused. "Haven't seen this account opened in decades." Clara felt her chest tighten. "Can we access it?" The manager frowned at the monitor. "Technically yes, but there was a restricted notice attached back in the 80s. Walter stayed quiet. "What kind of restriction?" Clara asked. "No destruction authorization," the man replied. "Just special release verification." "From who?" The manager squinted again. "Private legal counsel tied to Ridgemont County Trust." Walter and Clara exchanged a look. Even the storage unit had been monitored. The manager eventually retrieved a ring of keys and led them through a maze of narrow corridors lined with aging metal doors. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead with a soft electrical buzz that echoed through the concrete hallway. Unit C-14 sat near the far corner beneath a leaking pipe. Dust coated the lock. No signs of recent access. The manager opened the door halfway and stepped back politely. Inside were 6 archive boxes stacked beneath plastic tarps. Nothing else. Walter removed the tarp carefully. Every box carried state evidence labels. Audit exhibits. Foreclosure correspondence. Confidential transfer materials. Clara opened the first container with trembling hands. Inside sat original bank memos, internal land valuation projections, handwritten executive notes, and signed restructuring agreements connected to at least 17 displaced farms. Some pages carried red classification stamps. Others contained handwritten annotations from investigators. One exhibit stopped Clara cold. A large county map marked with colored pins and acquisition timelines. Future highway routes had been outlined nearly 3 years before public announcement. Properties belonging to financially vulnerable farmers were circled in black ink. Next to several names appeared short handwritten instructions. Increase pressure after harvest. Delay renewal response. Escalate variable terms quietly. Walter stared at the map for a long moment without speaking. It no longer looked like negligence. It looked coordinated. Then Clara found the worst document yet. A confidential internal memorandum dated September 1976. Subject: Controlled Agricultural Transition Strategy. At the bottom sat 3 signatures. Harold Hale. 2 regional development executives. An estate transportation liaison. Walter read the final paragraph twice. Projected acquisition value increase exceeds 800% upon corridor announcement. Early transfer completion remains essential before public disclosure phase. Clara slowly lowered the paper. They planned all of it. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead while rain began tapping against the warehouse roof. Walter continued sorting quietly through the remaining boxes until he uncovered a sealed envelope marked Supplemental Witness Statements, Do Not Duplicate. Inside were recorded testimonies from displaced farmers interviewed during the original investigation. Several described aggressive refinancing pressure shortly before foreclosure actions. One witness claimed bank representatives referenced highway construction months before public approval hearings even occurred. Another testified that legal notices appeared backdated. Many statements carried handwritten settlement markings beside the signatures. Paid. Closed. Withdrawn. Near the bottom of the envelope sat one final statement unsigned and partially unfinished. The witness name. Evelyn Boone. Clara covered her mouth immediately. Walter read silently. Evelyn described hearing Ridgemont executives discussing priority acquisition corridors during a private meeting in 1976. She stated she feared local farms were being targeted deliberately because families lacked resources to challenge foreclosure acceleration practices legally. The statement ended abruptly mid-sentence. No signature. No follow-up pages. Walter folded the document carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. He said nothing for nearly a full minute. Then footsteps echoed suddenly from somewhere beyond the corridor. Not the warehouse manager. Different shoes. Faster pace. Walter turned immediately toward the partially opened door. A man in a dark overcoat appeared briefly at the end of the hallway before disappearing around the corner. Clara's pulse jumped. They followed us. Walter moved calmly but quickly, resealing boxes while Clara photographed documents using her phone. Within minutes, another sound echoed through the corridor. Metal. Keys. Someone checking unit numbers. Walter shut the final box and carried 2 folders beneath his coat. Leave the rest, he said quietly. What if they destroy them? They won't risk it now. They exited through a side loading door into cold rain just as a black SUV turned slowly into the warehouse parking lot. Ridgemont County Trust logo. Same vehicle. Walter kept walking without looking back. By evening, copies of the most damaging exhibit sat inside 3 separate locations, one hidden beneath Evelyn's basement floorboards, one sealed inside Clara's county office locker, and one delivered anonymously to a state ethics attorney in Des Moines. At 8:14 p.m., Walter's home phone rang again. Curtis Hale's voice sounded thinner now. Less controlled. You've made your point. Walter sat quietly at the kitchen table beside Evelyn's notebooks. No, he replied softly. Not yet. A long silence followed. Then Hale spoke carefully. You don't understand the people connected to this. Walter looked toward the dark hallway leading downstairs to the basement files. I think your father did. The line went silent. Seconds later, Hale ended the call without another word. Near midnight, Clara received an email notification from the state record system. A formal inquiry request had just been reopened automatically under agricultural fraud review statutes. Originating office. State Financial Oversight Division. Status. Pending evidence submission. After 40 years, the case was alive again.